Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Now may I invite Anurabha Ghosh. He is CEO of CEEW. He is the country's leading climate and climate change environment expert. I welcome you, Anurabha. May I also invite Rajiv Mishra ji. He is CMD at PTC India. I hope you all are not sleeping. I clap for these two gentlemen. They are. I welcome you both. We are sitting in a very interesting time. The globally climate change experts are, taking this their numbers together to reach Abu Dhabi later this month to understand the stock takes. I wanted to understand from you both that we have reached to a certain stage of renewable energies curve in the country. We now understand that 100 gigawatt of solar or 75 gigawatt of wind is not possible to achieve in that time frame which earlier we envisaged. But still we have a very ambitious target for 2030. But we have to correct many things, right? From policy to the ecosystem to the sustainability financially, plus their integration of renewable generation into the grid. And its utility at the end. So help us in understanding. Maybe I can start with Rajiv. That there is a great debate which goes in the energy sector of how to do the marriage of firm and infirm power, renewable and conventional power. So tell us, what is the journey like and where are we heading?
Anilesh rightly said that. India is the fastest developing economy in the world. We have our energy needs and energy security requirement. Already we have 430 gigawatt of installed capacity, and 74% of this energy comes from the conventional source, that is the fossil fuel. Now we have to move it, or we have to move on to the more environmental friendly renewable energy, and that's the target we have set for ourselves, 230, 500 gigawatt, a very ambitious target, and we have achieved the whatever you have mentioned, 180 gigawatt of capacity from renewable sources including hydro, and that's a major milestone we have already achieved. Now while achieving this, there are some numbers which we can keep as targets, but when you are putting it on ground, then in the energy transition stage, you have to understand what are the issues and challenges we are facing, and the enabling provisions in the regulation, policy making, and of course, the other factors which will be helping to achieve these targets need to be seen in the right perspective. And I must compliment, or I must applaud the policymakers, the leadership, both political leadership as well as the business leadership, who has taken up is very effectively in the last 10 years, and we have reached to a stage from where on we can reach to the larger target of energy transition. Couple of things, 4 pillars which I always mention are basic for getting more of renewable in the system. The first will be the land acquisition, the second will be transmission infrastructure or green corridor, the third will be financing of it, and the fourth of is enabling regulations and making it more affordable and making it more integrated with the existing system. This will be the first what I would like to say at this point of time, but in the due course of discussions I'll like to add more.
Arunava, if we take this conversation further, in 2014 when this government came in the first tenure, there was a story which was told to us all that India will be having 175 gigawatts of renewable energy. At that time, hydro was not part of the calculations. Solar would be 100 gigawatt and 65 gigawatt would be of wind, and others will be the other 10 gigawatts. But now, when we look back, we could add only roughly around 120, 130 gigawatts of these, sources. As a country, this is also a very good number, but we haven't been able to achieve. But as an environmentalist, as somebody who works in the climate change policy side, how do you see country's journey? Do you think that by 2030 we will be able to achieve the 40% target of installed capacity and many of the challenges which Rajiv has also mentioned? So how do you see that space?
Anish, thank you. First of all, many thanks to India Today for inviting me to this conference. I want to make one correction. The spelling of my name is not Anurabha, it's Arunabha, but I'll say why I'm saying this. Arunabha means first rays of the rising sun. When it comes to India's solar and renewable story, the sun has already risen. In 2010, when the National Solar Mission began, and coincidentally CEEW was set up at the same time, we had less than 20 megawatts of solar. The fact that we have exceeded 70,000 megawatts of solar demonstrates for sure that the sun has risen. Nevertheless, to your point, you're absolutely right. The original target of 175 gigawatts of renewables has now become 175 gigawatts of non-fossil, which we've crossed. But pure renewables in that 125 gigawatts range. Now we've got to unpack it. Rather than get into despair why it happened and why it didn't happen, let's look at where we got to and what is the gap that remained. If you take just the 100 gigawatt solar target, actually a lot of the calculations that were done in 2014, we were also part of the process, was that the potential for 2022 was about 60 gigawatts of large-scale grid-connected infrastructure and 40 gigawatts of distributed energy infrastructure, some of which could be grid-connected, some of which could be off-grid. Okay. Now, if you actually look at what has happened, we have crossed that 60 gigawatts for grid-connected solar infrastructure, plus, of course, the 42 gigawatts of wind. So the opportunity that we have missed, or the opportunity that remains to be tapped, is actually the distributed energy infrastructure. Now, distributed energy in 2010 was one panel on a farmer's hut. Distributed energy today, as Karnataka Minister was also just saying, it could be solar irrigation pumps, which could also be grid interactive. It could be rooftop on a hotel like this. It could be distributed energy in terms of servicing an industrial cluster. Just 2 days ago, CEEW has released a report that the rooftop potential from India's households is 637 gigawatts. Way beyond what is our current target of 500 gigawatts for the country as a whole. So I would argue that we have certainly, without any embellishing of the facts, we have certainly demonstrated that India is a very large-scale infrastructure market for clean energy. It's the fourth largest clean energy market in the world by deployment. And now, for this decade, we now need to go beyond the so-called lower-hanging fruit of vanilla solar, vanilla wind, to the more hybrid systems, the distributed energy systems. And I think in addition to our decarbonization story, we also have to tap into our digital infrastructure story and make the two converge, because the better we manage the electron flow, the lesser will be the problem between the firm power and the infirm power.
Arunabha, I'll add to what are you saying. When we talk about renewable resources and its penetration into various parts of the country, but one thing which falls out of the conversation is the cost of it. One cost of it, which country is paying, right? We are not using the thermal potential of ours. The PLF of our thermal power plants are 60 to 70%. Then transmission is free for renewable. So if we add this to the renewables, certainly we start feeling that the return on investment is not that lucrative as yet. So how do you see how can we cut this the government expenditure and wasteful expenditure of maybe thermal units, or by not utilizing that potential? Do you think in next 10 years we need to put a focus there, that how can we deploy our resources much better?
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the climate negotiations that are coming up, and I have argued for a long time that in India it should not be a coal versus renewable story. It should be an efficient coal plus renewables versus inefficient coal story. And the problem we've had is that we are still using a lot of the inefficient coal power plants, which means that the existing thermal capacity is also not being utilized, its PLF remains low, and we are setting up a sort of a false binary between the clean energy transition and tapping into the resources that we have. So I think that is one part of how our power procurement happens, etc. But even when it comes to these issues of are we pricing renewables correctly, I could also argue we are not pricing fossil fuels correctly either. If you factor in the externalities, not just the environmental externalities, the health externalities, the disasters that we are getting impacted by because of climate change, we've got to stop thinking about clean energy just as an environmental issue, which is why this conversation in an infrastructure summit is so critical. Because now the clean energy story is an infrastructure story. The decarbonization story is a green industrial policy story. If the US is putting $369 billion of federal subsidies for renewables and hydrogen, I don't think in India we recognize that this decade alone, our renewables story, our green hydrogen story, and our electric mobility story offers an infrastructure investment opportunity of at least $500 billion. We've just not put it under one legislation called the Infrastructure Inflation Reduction Act. So the US says, oh, we are spending so much. We are offering a much larger market. We've got to project it that way and not get distracted by the false binaries.
Rajiv, if you can help me in understanding, when Anurabha talks about efficient thermal plus renewable, this becomes a very chicken and egg type of a story, because now we are getting into that cycle that we want a cheaper power. And fortunately or unfortunately, the old thermal power plants, they are giving us cheaper power, right? And new, which are more efficient because of the financial structure we have, situation we are in, they are producing expensive power. So efficiency is not giving you, the commercial aspect. So how do you see, this marriage can happen?
Anilesh, let me tell you, it's nothing which I agree with Dr. Ghosh in the aspects that whenever you are trying to bring in anything new, in a normal product life cycle, we start with a pilot project, then we provide some kind of incentive so that the product can be commercially viable, and then once it is commercially viable, you put it to the market to stand on its own feet. So is the case with renewable. We started with pilots, and so is the case with the green hydrogen. We are starting with pilots. Then we will put some incentive, that is what the waiver of transmission charges, and more incentives also, because we are giving PLIs for production incentive and all these things. That's quite natural. And for a developing nation where we are targeting for huge capacities to be installed in the country, produced in the country, you have to provide those kind of, say, incentives to the generators as well as manufacturers. Now the second part of the story is, the question what you have asked, is nothing against nothing. India requires, as I said, 74% of the energy comes from the thermal. And all the new plants which are coming are supercritical units, highly efficient units, and they should be utilized to the core, to the maximum. Now, how we are utilizing it, again, there can be some basic thumb rule or conventional way of doing it, and now we are doing more on analytical basis. We know which one is the most efficient one, we know which one is having the least fixed cost, and we also are aware of the fact that if we have to have a national level of market, where we can bring the most efficient one in the system first.
So most inefficient plants are state-owned. There
Exactly.
you don't have control. No?
I'll come to that. A concurrent subject. We know that power is, most of the policies and the procedures are being decided at the central level, gets it implemented. The procurement of the power also is done by the states, and they have their own way of procuring power. But all in all, last so many years, we have improved our systems and procedure to a great extent. We have implemented the central policies, and most of the states understand the benefits of it. It's not that no state, merit order dispatching and merit order procurement of power is known to almost every state, and they do it more analytical these days. Now the question is whether they would like to shut down their plants. Initially, there may be some resistance, but in due course of time, they also understand that getting coal, say if I give some examples of some of the northern states, where they get the thermal coal from either the central part of the country or from the eastern part of the country. Transporting coal is more expensive than their variable cost. So it makes no sense in generating those plants, older plants. So the point is, if you make it a logical economic sense to them, they will understand it, whether it is a concurrent subject also. And all these officials at the state level also, they have a very good understanding of the power market in the country right now.
So how do you see, one is the commercial aspect of it, but if state owns the generation unit and state owns the discom, there is a misnomer which our country faces that, they don't get the tariff which is agreed or whatever is prevailing. They get money only to buy fuel, they will get money only to pay salaries. In that type of scenarios, do you think that states are ready to invest more into renewables, which is more expensive, and it is more likely to have a commercial agreement? They will not adhere to, those political, considerations which they right now can prevail upon their own units. So how do you see that situation?
Let me be devil's advocate from the state side. They have put in money, say 30 years or 40 years back, for their thermal plants. No, they know the incremental cost for procuring power. See, if the variable cost of those old thermal plants are more than what they get from the renewable, they will never run that plant. And because now they are accountable, they have to go to the State Regulatory Commission each year that what is the procurement cost from the market and what is the cost what you are incurring in your own plants. So the incremental cost, if it is more than that, they will never generate. And let me tell you, this what we are saying right now, 5 years back it was a story where we were discussing a lot about the procurement not done scientifically. But now with more analytics available with them, better planning, they do it.
So Rajiv, they will give you regulatory assets. Incremental tariffs are being set off by regulatory assets. Anurabha, whatever Rajiv is saying, that requires more awareness at the state level. That these are thermal power plants which are not actually healthy for their own citizens, right? But this message needs to become more political, more social, and more, awareness needs to be generated. And here CEW's advocacy also comes into fore. So how do you see that space? And you wanted to make a point. You can also make that point as well.
No, I would argue it's not advocacy, it's actually analysis that is needed. Right? I think it is also unfair to say that just because there are regulatory assets and just because states are, in many cases often using the older plants, etc., to suggest that they therefore don't know what is the better outcome, that is an unfair statement. What is needed, the analysis that is needed is what is the way out, right? It's when we think of a power plant is not just the physical asset. It is a financial asset which has a fixed cost. In some cases that cost has been recovered, in some cases it hasn't been recovered. It's also a human asset. There are human beings employed there. There are 266 districts in India which has at least one coal-based asset. Right? And including our informal labor involved in coal and thermal, that's about 20 million people. Now, our analysis also suggests that with our clean energy targets, if it all rolls out, including with distributed energy, we have the potential to generate 50 million jobs. So net it will benefit. But district by district, we have to calculate, what is the pathway, what is the repurposing of an old asset? How could that land be reused? Do we deploy solar plants there on the same land? Do we make that asset a green hydrogen generator? Do we use it for an industrial facility? Do we reduce transmission costs by doing distributed energy infrastructure? Each district or each area will have its own transition pathway which has to be analyzed, and we have to have that honest conversation with regulators, with administrators, and with companies. Right? I think the challenge with a lot of the discourse we have is that we say if someone is talking about renewables, they must be anti-coal. If someone is talking about coal, they must be anti-environment. That is not the right atmosphere in which an analytical, solution-based conversation can be had.
And gentlemen, we are into the last leg of the conversation. So I want to prick your mind on hydrogen. Mr. Bhalla was here earlier in the morning. So he was talking about how countries moving ahead. From both you gentlemen, I want to understand, how our ecosystem is developing to consume this new form of energy. Are we getting into, the consumption mode? Or what sort of outlook you both gentlemen see in a way we should invest more to increase the absorption of this new energy?
Unless green hydrogen is one where we are at parity with the world. When I talk about renewable energy capacity, yes, we are trying to catch up the world and the technology, what is globally available. But in the green hydrogen, we are at a stage where we can start the thing and we can lead the race. And we have all the capabilities and capacities for making it happen. Now the question is, at what stage we are and what is the timeline we have set for ourselves. Right now we are talking about a number which is something which I'll call at a pilot stage. We have kept our targets at the pilot stage and that has to be met so that globally we can tell the world that we are at the right place. Second thing is the allied technologies. It's not that green, that means renewable source, and the electrolysis of the water or any liquid, so to make it hydrogen. So there are other allied technologies that need to cope up with the technologies available elsewhere. And there we need to come to a stage where we can say that commercially we are at a better position globally. And of course this will be one thing which will change the landscape for import substitution of hydrocarbons. It will be a substitute for many of the handicaps which some of the states don't have, because renewable also is limited to some of the states which is endowed with renewable, others are not. But here you have parity for pan-India. You can spread it anywhere and that can happen. We can take it as a leader position internationally. But the most important thing is we have to develop the integrated technology and not specific to one area only. That's what I can say.
So firstly, again, I think it is commendable that India now has, and the cabinet approved in January this year, the world's second largest green hydrogen mission after the United States, a single country mission. US target for 2030 is 10 million tons per annum, ours is 5 million tons per annum. That is huge. However, I would say that we have to have sort of two things that we should keep in mind as we push the mission forward. Number one is focus on the domestic market before the international market, and focus on demand pull in addition to the supply push. The domestic market, if you analyze the green hydrogen policies across the world, all major economies and minor economies are saying we are going to be export superpowers with regards to green hydrogen. The point is, if you're going to be, everyone is going to be exporting, then who is going to be importing? Right? So we are going to end up, and it is already happening, we are going to end up with regulatory islands that will become sort of protectionist barriers to a global green hydrogen market. In order to avoid that, let us build our domestic market strongly, and on top of that, then look at the exports. But in order to build the domestic market, you've got to do the second thing, which is demand pull. Why? Today, let me just give an example. Today, producing green hydrogen compared to gray hydrogen is 300% costlier. Today, producing green steel from green hydrogen instead of steel from coal is 150% costlier. But Volkswagen in Germany has signed a deal with a small Swedish startup to buy green steel. the incremental cost of the car with green steel in it is 1% costlier.
Okay.
Now we've got to start thinking, is green hydrogen too expensive, or is the embedded green hydrogen in the embedded steel, which is embedded in the final product, really that much more expensive? Once we start thinking about what is the final cost to the consumer, we can actually think whether it's infrastructure, whether if every bridge in India were built with green steel, the market demand would be so large that the cost of green steel would fall immediately, which means that the demand for green hydrogen would go up. Same with fertilizer. So we've got to start thinking, how do we create the offtake in a manner that is financially sustainable, commercially viable, to get that green hydrogen story unfolded.
Very interesting points, Arunabha. And gentlemen, this is the signal which I am getting that times is up. And I really thank that you helped us in understanding many of these ticklish issues. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.